In 2013, China had 0 ports outside its own borders. 0. By 2026, it controls or owns stakes in over 100 ports across 60 countries. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. If you put those ports on a map, almost every single one sits right next to a US military base. That's not a coincidence. When most people hear China is buying ports, they think trade. More shipping? Cheaper goods? That kind of thing. And look, that's exactly what China wants you to think. The official story is called the Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion infrastructure program. Roads, railways, ports, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. China presents it as development aid, economic partnership, a rising tide that lifts all boats. But here's what the official story leaves out. The ports China builds are almost never just ports. Let me tell you about a small island most people have never heard of. Hambantota, Sri Lanka. Back in 2007, Sri Lanka needed money to build a deep water port. China showed up with a loan, generous terms, long repayment window. Sri Lanka said yes, the port got built, but it never made enough money to cover the debt. By 2017, Sri Lanka was drowning in what it owed, so China came back with a solution. Hand us the port. 99-year lease. We'll wipe the debt. Sri Lanka signed. China walked away with a fully operational deep water port right in the middle of the Indian Ocean for nearly a century. Now zoom out on that map. Hambantota sits 200 miles from the main US naval corridor between the Middle East and the Pacific. That was not a coincidence, and Hambantota wasn't a one-off. It was a template. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Take Djibouti. Tiny country. Sits right at the mouth of the Red Sea, the choke point between Europe, Asia, and Africa. China built a commercial port there in 2013. By 2017, they quietly converted it into their first official overseas military base. And that base sits 8 miles from Camp Lemonnier, the largest US military installation in Africa. 8 miles. Then there's Gwadar, Pakistan. China poured $62 billion into building a port city there, almost from nothing. Why? Because Gwadar sits right on the Arabian Sea. It gives China a direct route that completely bypasses the Strait of Malacca. That strait is one of the most critical choke points in the world, and in any conflict, the US Navy has the power to shut it down. Gwadar is China's way around that problem. Now look at Europe. In 2016, a Chinese state company bought the port of Piraeus, the largest port in Greece, one of the largest in all of Europe. It's 60 miles from NATO's Southern Command headquarters. And then there's one that really rattled Washington, Darwin, Australia. In 2015, a Chinese company signed a 99-year lease on Australia's most strategically important northern port. 3 months after the deal was done, US officials found out that American Marines had been rotating through Darwin for years, part of a long-standing deployment agreement with Australia. A Chinese-controlled port. American troops in the same city. Washington was reportedly furious. No one had told them before the ink dried. Now, to be fair, China has an answer for all of this, and it's not a bad one. China is the world's biggest trading nation. It needs port access. It needs supply chains that don't collapse if someone else decides to block a strait. And honestly, every major power in history has done this. Britain did it. America did it. The Dutch were doing it 400 years ago. That argument is not wrong. But here's the question nobody in the room wants to ask. Why does a commercial shipping company need a berth that's 350 meters long and 15 meters deep? because commercial container ships, they need about 12 to 15 meters of draft. China's biggest naval destroyers need 8. Aircraft carriers need 12. The ports being built across Africa and South Asia, Hambantota, Gwadar, Djibouti, are all spec'd way beyond what commercial shipping actually needs. You don't build that for cargo. You build that for something else. In 2004, a confidential report for the US Department of Defense introduced a phrase that's stuck ever since: the string of pearls. The idea is simple. China has been placing ports, one by one, along the entire Indian Ocean coastline, from the South China Sea all the way to the Persian Gulf. Each port is a pearl. Together, they form a chain, wrapped around every major US naval route between the Pacific and the Middle East. Now, here's why that matters so much. The US has spent 70 years building the most powerful navy in history specifically to control that corridor: the Strait of Malacca, the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf. That control isn't just military power, it's economic power. It's how America enforces sanctions, how it projects force anywhere on Earth, how it keeps the dollar as the world's reserve currency, because global trade priced in dollars needs a safe global trade route. China's port network, read charitably, is about trade security. Read strategically, it's about building the infrastructure to challenge every single one of those choke points at the same time. Here's what the next 10 years look like if nothing changes. By 2030, based on deals already signed, China will have port stakes covering every major ocean on Earth. Not just the Indian Ocean. East Africa, West Africa, South America, the Arctic. China's been pouring money into Arctic shipping routes that open up as polar ice retreats. Routes that completely bypass the Strait of Malacca and cut shipping time from Shanghai to Rotterdam by 30%. And here's the thing about all this infrastructure. You don't have to fire a single shot to reshape global power. You just have to own the ports, own the berths, own the logistics, own the choke points. In a crisis, every port China controls in a third country becomes a potential resupply node, an intelligence position, a point where someone else's ships aren't welcome. The US figured that out 80 years ago. China has been studying that playbook ever since, and for the last 15 years, it's been running it. So why does any of this matter to someone sitting here watching this video? Because this competition between the US and China for control of the world's ports and shipping routes is the invisible story behind almost every major news headline you'll see in the next 30 years. The price you pay for things, the stability of your currency, which countries your government can actually pressure, and which ones it can't, which wars happen, and which ones don't. It's not abstract. It's the physical foundation underneath everything. Most people will never connect those dots. They'll see the headlines about shipping delays and rising costs and trade wars, and they'll wonder why. They won't see the ports. Now you do. The next video covers the other side of this story, what the US is actually doing in response, and why the strategy is both smarter and more desperate than most people realize. If you want to understand the world as it actually is, not just how it gets reported, subscribe.